Blackbeard versus Law. So the first thing I want to say is that this fight is a lot more one-sided than a lot of people think. There's some notions going around that I disagree with highly, and we're going to get through it all here, and I'm going to try to make this as clear as possible. So this fight spans chapters 1063 to 1081, but again, only 3 of these chapters are actually pertaining to the fight. Now, we start things off in 1063 with a point of hot debate right now, whether or not Blackbeard was using Conqueror's Haki here. Of course, we've had no official confirmation of Conqueror's Haki, but we do see some suspicious lightning attacking Law's ship. Now, some people think this is the Gura, and it is very possible that that could be the case, especially with the way that the Gura looks in the next chapter. It could very well just be Gura lightning. The anime kind of made it look more so like Conqueror's, but the anime should really never be taken as canon. They have a board of 7 different directors that run the operation over there. Oda has very little to any involvement with the anime nowadays, and they take liberties to add things of their own accord time and time again. And even an animator from that specific episode was on BDA Law's channel and came out and said you shouldn't take what happens in these episodes as canon when they deviate from the manga. So I wouldn't champion this as Conqueror's Haki definitively yet, but I did just want to bring this to your attention just in case you're curious. And whatever attack this was, it did heavy damage to the submarine. And it kind of forces Law into a fight. They say there's no escape. They have to rise to the surface. One more hit will crush the sub. Then see that Dakyu's disease fruit flipped Law's crew's gender, turned Law into a girl, and we get to see Law power out of the disease with his Haki. We actually see the ZZT effect that's usually in line with Conquerors. Obviously, Law not being a Conqueror kind of dispels some notions that ZZT always means Conquerors. And we got that interesting line of dialogue from Law that says he learned something from the Yonko fight on the roof. You can break through Devil Fruit powers with intense enough Haki. So we got to see the scope of how far that goes. We'll see if some Devil Fruit powers are immune. There's been some hints to Bo's fruit being immune to that, but we'll have to see how this works out. Should Blackbeard's fruit be immune to that as well? You know, because that'd be weird. Like, it's supposed to nullify your Devil Fruit, but what if you can just like power through the Devil Fruit nullification? This is going to be a slippery slope going forward in the series. We then see Dakyu flying in, and he says, oh, he broke through the disease. And once he's broken through, his antibodies will spread just as his illness did. Essentially, that's how the crew got helped. His antibodies spread to the other crew members. We then see Van Augur teleport him and Burgess to the island where Burgess throws this giant mountain. Now, this is actually pretty interesting because Law actually expends a lot of stamina here, because it's in a very small panel because you don't really get to see. He throws this mountain like directly at Law's crew. It's about to crush them, and Law creates a room big enough to encapsulate the entire mountain that Burgess threw and slices it up. And you can actually see that Law starts wheezing after destroying it, so we know that this exerted him. I don't think that obviously he's diminished in any capacity, but it's just important to note. We then see Blackbeard flying in. He says, it's been a while, Trafalgar. Straw Hat, Kid, or you. I knew that one of you would come. Go figure that Kaido and Big Mom fell. You've turned this whole world upside down. It's been a blast. And how many have you found? I'll take all your road poneglyphs. Of course, Kaido would have had at least one. And Law says, same back to you. In this fight, winner takes all. So the thing that I think is super interesting about this is that Blackbeard was prepared for any of the 3 that showed up. So imagine that he fights the Straw Hats here. He was prepared. He wanted to fight the Straw Hats. And it talks to what Whitebeard said about him being overconfident. He was prepared to take on the Straw Hats with only half his crew and not necessarily the stronger members of the crew, at least like the top of the crew, Aokiji and Shiryu, not being there. Pretty wild in respect. With that said, we go to the next chapter. In this chapter, we see that Blackbeard's preparing to use Tremor Crush. But as he's loading this up, you actually see the same ZZT effect. Law then uses his awakening and uses Reroom to amputate Stronger, sending Blackbeard into freefall. And he clearly says that he did not know Law's powers could do that, and he was caught off guard by this, obviously. He figures out it's an awaken attack and then still launches his Tremor Crush while in freefall. The Tremor Crush basically just fucking slams into the ground where Law's crew's at. So they take this shockwave. We don't know if Law got hit by this attack. We don't see him get hit by it, so I'm gonna assume he didn't. And Dakyu starts falling and is planning on exploding these apples on the Law crew. Penguin, one of Law's crewmates, actually dives into the sea and is able to intercept Dakyu and take care of the apples and take care of Dakyu for the time being. A lot of people believe that like Law's crew's ass, and it is. But They actually held their own in this fight, at least in the early stages in the parts we see. So early on, it's not really a situation where Law's getting jumped per se. His crew holds their own. In this instance, we see Penguin was able to handle what Doc Q was throwing. And then next, we see that John Bard is able to step in front of a shot from Van Auger, protecting Law so he can activate K-Room and land Shock Willie on Blackbeard. Van Auger even goes so far as to say he has a really tough guard to break. Also, very important to note here, Law then extends his sword to land Shock Willie. Law cannot teleport when K-Room is active because the room is no longer around himself, it is around the sword. So that's why he can extend the sword. He cannot teleport with this ability. So he stays standing on the island and shoots out K-Room. Now initially I had thought Blackbeard actually did get hit in the back from this, but he actually gets hit in his chest, in the front of his body. That being said, it's clearly shown he wasn't paying attention to Law. He was worried about falling into the ocean. He didn't really know what was happening. It's also established he has no idea about these awakened abilities. So K-Room lands. I wouldn't really classify this as a valid feat because of the situation Blackbeard's in. His mobility is crunched. He's in free fall and he's not focused on Law clearly. And it clearly shows right after this that he can react to the same attack when he's on even ground, prepared for combat. With that said, it does some serious damage to Blackbeard. His eyes go white and he keeps falling, and it's in question whether or not he could have potentially died here if it wasn't for Van Auger, who warps in, grabs him, and teleports him to the island. Now I love Blackbeard's dialogue here because Van Auger says, "Shall we return to the ship?" insinuating something of a retreat, which would be all times levels of fucking embarrassment for a Yonko, especially against Law's crew, to lose and retreat. Blackbeard says, "No, hell no, you fool, stay on the offensive, like I'm gonna win this fight." So I like that. So Blackbeard then lands. Law notices that all Blackbeard's officers have powers now, which means they all share the same weakness, the sea. And Blackbeard says, "But the benefits are worth the risk." That's how devil fruits work. So I think at this point, Law understands that, yeah, his crew is probably fucked in the long run. They'll probably lose. Like, I don't think Law doesn't realize that his crew is shit in terms of prowess, and that I think his whole plan is going to be to try to just get them to the sea, teleport them to the sea, because I don't know if any of the commanders here have strong enough hockey to counteract his ability. But obviously he'd have to get through Blackbeard first before he could do that anyway, if that was the case. And Law tries using K-Room and Shock Willie once again, but this time Blackbeard is prepared, showing that when he's on even footing, he can easily react to this attack, further reinforcing the fact that the sky stab wasn't valid. He reacts and counters the shockwave with his own shockwave, because otherwise it would go straight through him. So he has to use the Gura here to counter the shockwave. So he blocks it. I don't really view this as like a clash, so to speak. Obviously you do see the Gura is activated. I just really believe that truly Blackbeard is simply blocking this attack here. Also, it's important to note that when Law has his room active on other things, like when he uses his awakening and he puts it on the sword, he's not within his room anymore. So he's not going to be able to teleport freely. So his mobility is less than it usually is as well. Blackbeard then pulls out Black Vortex as Law notices something sinister is coming. And that's where we cut away for now. The next time we cut back to this is chapter 1081. Here what we see is that time has passed. There's an explosion. The submarine was destroyed. With that said, you also see that Burgess and Van Auger are flanking Blackbeard on each side. See that Law was clearly fucked up. Beppo was fucked up. Now we don't know what Burgess was doing. I mean, we didn't really get to see him do any fighting. I'm assuming he went over there and just dogged Beppo, but who knows? It's very clear that there was a imbalance in terms of crew strength that was going to be inevitable. So Law was fucked regardless. The only thing is, like, we don't really know how this end sequence took place. Now I believe Blackbeard did win by himself. Even if Law had escaped the initial Black Vortex and landed one more attack, I don't think Law lasted much longer after the Black Vortex came out. Now first off, if Black Vortex hit, a lot of Law's mobility and his AP is significantly fucked. His hacks are really the way that he gets his scaling, whether it be from his teleportation or from his during negating attacks. So I don't think there's much to do if his Delfruit is negated. Now, was he able to get away and land an attack? How did that play out? I wish we got to see. There's obviously something Oda is not trying to show us in regards to Blackbeard's power. One thing I do want to make mention of is that Blackbeard's power, it should in theory give him infinite weight, because he says he has infinite gravity, which would affect the mass of his body, which is why he hits so hard, because he essentially creates whatever weight he wants to his attacks with the Yami. So I think that that's actually what he crushes you with, and you know, why like Bo starts bleeding as soon as he chokes her and grabs her in like that choke slam position. Ace almost breaks his neck from a chop. Things like this. And I think that with the Gura, if he combines the two attacks, like it's insane destructive force, because the Gura can Dura negate, and then you have this like huge amount of weight. So if Law's taking those attacks, like obviously he's gonna get clapped. But that said, I do think that this is pretty impressive. Him taking the Shock Willie was pretty good. It's a similar endurance feat to Big Mom. Her bones were broken from Shock Willie. She broke ribs from it, and truthfully, I believe that that's what broke her arm. You can see that the sword goes through her arm from the initial Shock Willie, and that's the same exact arm she tries to block the Cornadilla with. That same Shock Willie broke her ribs where they didn't even pierce them. I assume that at bare minimum, it greatly weakened the bone in her arm. So I think that with the knowledge that the Shock Willie is something that is rattling Big Mom's bones, and Blackbeard doesn't seem to have been inhibited in any way. Obviously doesn't have the same capacity to replenish his bones like Big Mom does, turning them into homies. It's a pretty impressive endurance feat. Also, when you see how many attacks Law was able to take from Big Mom, even Kaido, Blackbeard, if he did take out Law, even if it wasn't a one-shot, if he took out Law in quick succession from that final point, it's a very impressive feat when comparing it to the other Yonkos. Now, in fairness, Law didn't fight a full power Kaido. He did get Thunder Bagwood by hybrid and was incapacitated, but he was able to still fight and keep fighting and fought a whole nother Yonko after that. And Big Mom, I think that's the one that really compares to, where Law took countless attacks from Big Mom. There was even a point where he's stabbing through her for a long range Shock Willie to connect to the ground, and she is repeatedly punching the shit out of him with Haki, and he just endures. So this really makes Blackbeard look good in that sense. And then the final thing that happens is that, you know, Blackbeard, he was getting ready to take Law's Devil Fruit, and Beppo goes Sulong and is able to land an attack on all three of them, it seems. Now, I do think that it knocked Blackbeard down, but Blackbeard's careless. I'm not going to really like count this as like a crazy anti-feat for him. Beppo kind of just catches him by surprise, obviously, then like destroys some rubble and gets away. I kind of really chalk that up to plot. Like, obviously, I don't think anybody thinks Beppo is this monster. I mean, Sulong's a pretty good amp. We haven't got to see his prowess in it. Either way, they're not prepared for that. They were already kind of tired, and then, you know, all that happened was Beppo just used a little bit of a diversion to get away. It's a little impressive, but if you just take it for what it is, I think it's more so plot. So in conclusion, I'm still going to classify this as a low diff fight. I think that the true reasoning for this interaction is to be a parallel to Shanks dropping Kid, but it's also supposed to contrast the way Shanks finished Kid, because Shanks is clearly the one that's uptight, so to speak, but he has things planned out. He doesn't take any chances. On the other hand, you have Blackbeard, who's careless, reckless, and goes into fights without clearly thinking everything out. As said by Van Auger, they went into that fight without a plan. When you really look at it, yes, Law did a lot of damage to Blackbeard with the Shock Willie, but when you put it into context that Blackbeard had no idea about the awakening and had no means to react normally in the air to the Shock Willie, and then when they get on even ground, he just easily reacts to it, you understand that it's like very situational that Law even landed that. Shout out to his battle IQ for sure. Law's a great strategist, but in terms of scaling, he doesn't really scale to Blackbeard. He can damage anybody, and I'm sure he can outsmart a lot of people too, but when they're on equal footing, Blackbeard didn't have any trouble. So if you think that Law like lasted a little bit longer, I'm fine with that, but there's no evidence for me to believe that Law did anything of any note, especially when you consider that Shock Willie is his strongest attack, and you know that gimmick's already been kind of dealt with from Blackbeard. Like, he's already seen it and reacted to it. Now maybe like a gamma knife or something, but that's presupposing we even know the anatomy of Blackbeard's body, which is this crazy hyped up is this wild crazy thing that allows him to eat 2 devil fruits. His body's weird or whatever. So I don't even know what gamma knife would do, but it's not an awakened attack anyway, so it's not gonna hit like Shock Willie. And like I said, this fight was really just to establish Blackbeard's careless, but he is dangerous as fuck, and Law got handled and dispatched of. And in my opinion, it's a clear 1-to-1 that Blackbeard looks more impressive than Big Mom, but I'll leave that up to you. Low diff. I'll catch you guys in the next one.